So I was bright on the way here, and I was able to catch several images on my camera phone um, for you to see. Okay, I get brighted regularly. I get harassed regularly, and they try to do things in a way that tries to spur on extreme anger, and they use military-grade psychology. Right? These are people who are working with people with PhDs in psychology, what have you, to try to elicit an angry response so they can then say, why don't you be a Buddhist? Why don't you take medicine? So they could try to argue that I should change my philosophy. It's part of the greater toxic masculinity push, but it's also something that is a slave master. It's a left-right paradigm push first and foremost, right? The right wing is basically a bunch of angry kind of slave masters, kind of like the police who harassed Martin Luther King and the hate groups. And the left wing plays their position and tries to tame, right? It's a tame game, if you will. They try to tame people in a way that makes them subservient and more easily controlled by the white Jewish and LGBT power structure. If you look at how the government is structured, the demographics of it, you look at the corporations, you look at the types of people and the types of minorities that are there and how they resemble white people more than you'd expect people from another race to resemble them, right? In their behavior, their mannerisms, their manner of speaking, what have you. Oh, it is crystal clear what is going on here and why. So when we look at organized harassment, what some people call gangstalking, it's really gangs of people, not necessarily criminal gangs, but they're involved to some degree. Okay, we can tell that this is obviously going on, and when we see this massive denial that's taking place, it's being led by the white, Jewish, and LGBT communities because these are simply the types of people that run this nation historically. Okay, even when Obama was president, his power is extremely limited, and he was trying to explain that, and he's still trying to explain that every once in a while. Okay. So we see the denial, right? They deny ill. Is it sick to be a racial supremacist and to move behind the scenes and harass people and play stupid about it and create loopholes in the law and just flat out ignore the law? Why people are harassed? Yes. So they're denying that there's a bunch of ill people. Okay, narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, but really just the average person is ill. Okay, so a culture of suppressing people unfairly, and people who are participating in what's called silent complicity, or they're controlled opposition trying to create straw men to confuse the issue. So if you're trying to confuse the issue and you're pointing the finger at somewhere else and admitting that it's going on, but you're trying to confuse who, what, when, where, how, why, and what should be done, then you're complicit. If you're just scared, keeping your head down, then it's silent complicity, right? By not speaking on it, it's making it seem like it's not a problem, that anyone who would complain about it should just shut up. And obviously, if you're directly doing it in whatever way, that obviously that you're complicit. So they're denying that it's ill to do that, and they're sick, and that they have no business drugging people in mental health based on the social norms of the society, which is what's going on here. They talk about false beliefs and delusions, and they gaslight people. They pretend that the person's crazy, and they covertly drug them like they're covertly drugging me and fuming poison. So then they can say, hey, you know what? You admit that you're covertly drugged. So even whether you are or not, your perception can't be trusted. And then they ignore the 22 witnesses I have on record and so on and so forth. Okay. Clear-cut gaslighting. The evidence works in my favor and nowhere near works in theirs. Okay. So we also see the other ill words, right? Ill-gotten gains, right? They're denying they're ill. Denial, right? Deny ill. It's a play on words, for example. And I'm going to use that as the wordplay to help you understand. Okay, I don't speak in code, but I do break down wordplay for you. Okay, denying that they're ill. Okay, so ill-gotten gains, mentally ill, right? Narcissism, fanatic racism, social norm fanatics, pack animal fanatics. They just roll with the group and say everyone's doing it, so whatever it is, Nazis, communists purging people, whatever it is, they just roll with the crowd, right? Instead of saying over their dead body and so on and so forth. See, illusion, right? Illusion, right? Psychology instead of reality and so on and so forth. Propaganda, theater arts, what have you. And they're still ill. So it's the evolution of the ill cultures that we saw in segregation and slavery. It's just that going on right now. They also have a sort of moral deficiency disorder and the accompanying indifference. Let me give you an example here. If somebody denies, now this is a little bit tricky for some people because as soon as they see religion or monotheism, they run for the hills and they don't want to admit this truth here. If you don't believe that there's at least a possibility that God exists, that morals are important, then you have moral deficiency disorder. The reason why I define this as a disorder is because, it's what I call the smoking gun effect. Okay, what came first, right? What came first if not God? So if you deny that the logical assumption is that the first thing that there ever was something was powerful enough to not need to be created. It doesn't need to be born, right? It's powerful enough to defy these things and have created time itself, etc. Okay? Then you're denying the overwhelmingly logical conclusion. It's one thing for you to think that maybe that's not what happened. It's another thing to live your life as if that's not the logical conclusion. Again, it's one thing to think that maybe there isn't a God, right? It's another thing to live your life like you have another explanation for how you're here and why you're here. Okay? This is what I compare to a smoking gun. If you're a cop and you heard gunshots and you drive up, you turn a corner and you see somebody with a smoking gun in their hand. Okay? Do you say, hey, maybe that's not what happened, and let me just keep driving? Or do you pop out and pull out a gun and say, drop the gun or put it down or whatever, right? So you're going to pop out because that's your job, right? Why is that your job? You don't know if someone threw that guy the gun. You don't know if that guy is trying to defend himself. If he's the only person you see somebody dead on the ground, for example, and that guy has a smoking gun, and the blood patterns on the ground, seem to match the idea that this person shot that person, that you're going to say, put the gun down, right? And you're going to take him into custody and start to figure out what's going on. If you didn't, you wouldn't be guilty of criminal negligence or something, right? Why didn't you do the job? Obstructing justice in a sense, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so it is with God, right? There's an abundance of evidence, right? The sun's brilliance, the patterns in nature, intelligent human life, okay? Fruit trees, right? The circumstances for life to exist. What are the odds that all these things exist that create this exact scenario? It screams at God. And then the idea that the first thing that ever was had to be powerful enough to create itself. Okay? So it's just like that smoking gun. So, and then the justice and righteousness. What is the odds that morality creates mental clarity? And they've done many studies that show that definitively. What are the odds that the morality creates mental clarity and you go into like a fugue state if you're immoral? A spectrum of a fugue state, a fugitive state, where you're not thinking straight. You see what I'm saying? What are the odds? So obviously God has created the circumstances for you to enjoy yourself more and to be more respectable and have better relationships and family life and on and on and on and on, and to think more clearly if you do the right thing. So God is a God of justice and morality. And then there's martial arts, right? No one could beat me because I'm doing the right thing and they're all doing the wrong thing. And I come from a long generation of people doing the right thing. Okay, a long line of people doing the right thing. They come from a long line of people doing the wrong thing. So what are the odds that all these things exist? So we can then ascertain definitively that people who don't live their lives knowing that the logical conclusion for somebody who doesn't sense God is still that there's a God. And if you've been moral and you sense God, then you must acknowledge that there's a God and you must put God first because that's the point of life. If your life gets cut short, oh well, because God is a God of justice and he's going to do you justice. That's the overwhelmingly logical conclusion. So if you deny that you slip into a state of denial, and that's a sickness. Okay, that's a fugitive state. That's a fugue state. That doesn't allow for proper brain activity to truly be sane. That's a state of insanity. Okay. We see a lot of people with the more for me mentality. They see all these drug addicts dying, these homeless people dying, and they say, so what? More for me, right? And that creates those fugitive mentalities. We see people with indifference, people who have let cowardice prevent them from serving God by being as moral as they could possibly be, okay? Which creates the fugue state. So they're not thinking straight. But because I have acknowledged that God exists and I'm insisting on morality, and it's moral to risk your life and say do the right thing to everybody, and it's immoral to not risk your life, and to by not saying do the right thing to everybody, I've proven that I'm thinking more clearly than they are. They cannot then turn around in denying the overwhelmingly logical assumption and conclusion to the agnostic that God exists and you must be moral, and then say they're thinking straight and I'm not. And of course, if they're monotheistic, they're extremely hypocritical. If they then say that they know there's a God and they know they should be moral, then why aren't they? Because they don't think straight enough to follow through.